Hey, I'm your storyteller. I'd love to know where you're watching from. You can tell me in the comments section. When you are ready, lean back, and let's dive into this week's horror stories. I've been gaming for a long time, mostly late at night after work. It's how I wind down. I don't play competitively or anything, mostly casual Call of Duty matches with friends or solo when no one's on. I don't use my real name, don't talk much in lobbies, and I've had the same generic gamer tag for years. I like to stay pretty low-key. It was a Thursday, just after midnight. I was on Modern Warfare 2 playing Team Deathmatch. I had my headset on, volume kind of low, and I was just zoning out while the next game loaded. There were maybe 5 or 6 random players in the lobby, but no one was talking. Just the usual static and some background noise. Then someone's mic came to life. All they said was, "Alex." That's my name. But like I said, I never use it online. I just sat there for a second, staring at the screen. I figured maybe someone was talking to a friend named Alex, or I misheard it. But then it came again. "Alex, turn around." That time I ripped the headset off and spun around in my chair. I was expecting something. I don't even know what. But there was nothing there. Just my room, the lamp in the corner, the laundry on the floor, and my monitor glowing in the dark. Everything looked normal. I put the headset back on. Silence. A few seconds later, the match started. I played the whole game with my mic muted and no sound. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence and that he was speaking to a friend. But it didn't feel like that. It felt personal, like someone who actually knew me. The next few days were normal. I avoided solo lobbies, only played with friends, and kept everything muted. I even told one of my buddies about the voice, kind of half joking like it was just a creepy moment. He laughed and said maybe someone was doxing me, but we didn't take it seriously. Then about a week later, it got worse. It was a Saturday morning. I went outside to grab coffee and noticed something sitting on my doormat. Just a small black USB drive. No note, no envelope. Just the drive, sitting right in the middle of the mat. I took it inside and plugged it into an old laptop I don't use anymore. I didn't want to plug it in my main computer just in case it had some virus on it. There was only one file on it. No name or details. It was a video with a timestamp from the exact night I heard the voice in the game. I opened it. It was a video of me, sitting at my desk, playing Call of Duty. It was recorded from my webcam, the one built into my monitor. I freaked out. How could someone have access to my webcam? At the end of the recording, another clip came up. It was a dark picture with the text, "I'm coming for you." I unplugged the webcam, ran virus scans on every device I owned. Nothing came up. It was like the footage had come from nowhere, and whoever made it, they'd been in my system without leaving a trace. I kept thinking about the voice in the game. They were watching me when they said it. I didn't call the police, what would I even say? That someone sent me a creepy video and whispered at me through a game? They would just tell me there was no real threat, no crime, just paranoia. I even started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I'd left my webcam on, or if this was all just some messed up prank. For a while, nothing else happened. A few weeks passed. I stopped gaming altogether. I changed my passwords, even swapped out my router. Life felt normal again, or close enough. I started to think maybe it was over. Then about a month later, I got home from work, unlocked my door, and saw it. On my computer chair, a black gaming headset. It wasn't mine. My own headset was still hanging on the wall where I'd left it. There was no signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing. But someone had been inside. and they'd left it behind. I checked every corner of the apartment, every closet, under every bed. Nothing. I never plugged the headset in. I just put it in a box and left it on the porch while I was deciding what to do with it. The next night, my phone lit up while I was in bed. No caller ID, just one text message. Wrong headset. Use the one I gave you. I moved the next week. New place, new number, and a new PC. At least for now, it seems to have stopped. But I'm still too paranoid to play online games. I was 24 when I moved into this small apartment in a city I'd never lived in before. Rent was cheap, decent location, utilities included, couldn't complain. The building was old, like the 1960s maybe. 6 floors, faded red brick, cracked tiles in the lobby. Bit worn down, but nothing sketchy. What threw me off was the doorman. I wasn't expecting one, not in a place like that. But when I moved in, there he was. Tall guy, probably in his 50s, black coat and gloves even though it was warm out. Just standing inside the front entrance like he was part of the building. I gave him a little nod and a polite, awkward smile. You know, the kind you give someone you'll see a lot, but never really talk to. "Afternoon?" he said. Deep voice, calm, completely emotionless. "Hey," I replied. "You work here?" He nodded once. "I see who comes and who goes." And that line stuck with me. For the first few days, everything was normal. I'd come and go. And no matter the time, the middle of the day, the middle of the night, he'd be there. Same spot, always standing. I even tested it a couple times. Went out super late, came back even later. Still there, just watching. I figured maybe it was a long shift thing, or maybe there were 2 guys that looked the same. I didn't think too much about it. At least, not until the night I forgot my keys. It was a random Tuesday. I'd gone out with co-workers for some wings and drinks, got back around 11:30, and realized I left my keys inside. I figured I'd just ask the doorman to buzz me in or call my neighbor. But when I got to the front door, he wasn't there. The lobby was empty. I looked around a bit, checked the corners. Nothing. First time I hadn't seen him since I moved in. Then I noticed the front door was already unlocked. I pushed it open and walked in. The security desk was completely bare. No chair, no name tag, nothing. Just empty tile and an unplugged phone. I had this tight, uncomfortable feeling in my chest. I went upstairs and went to bed. The next day, I asked the landlord about it. Told him about the guy in the black coat who's always at the door. He gave me this weird look like he didn't know what I was talking about. "We don't have a doorman," he told me. "Haven't had one in years. We use cameras now." I asked him to check the footage from my move-in day. He didn't want to at first, but I pushed a bit, mostly just out of curiosity. Eventually, he agreed. We went into his office and pulled up the lobby camera. I pointed out the exact time and day I moved in. We watched the footage. And there I was, walking in with my suitcase, nodding at no one, smiling at empty space. I felt sick. I asked to see the tape from the night I got locked out. We watched that too. It showed me walking up, trying the door, stepping inside. At one point I froze. I looked off to the right like I saw something. Then I walked in. There was nobody there. I moved out the next week. Didn't care about the lease or the deposit. I didn't feel safe. Not because of him exactly, but because I couldn't trust what I saw. I heard that man. Talked to him. I wasn't hallucinating. And part of me still thinks I wasn't the only one. Because the night before I left, I passed this older woman getting her mail in the lobby. She looked up at me and asked, "You leaving?" "Yeah," I said. "Just didn't feel right here." She gave me this knowing smile. It's the man in the coat, isn't it? I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. She smiled a little and said, "He only shows himself to the new ones." Then she turned and walked away. Last summer, my girlfriend and I went on a Caribbean cruise. Her idea. A full week off the grid. No work, no phones, just the sun and ocean. I wasn't exactly thrilled, never been much of a cruise guy, but the ship was impressive. 15 decks, pools, casinos, all that. Like a floating city. By day 4, though, the novelty had worn off. We'd already done the excursions, sat through the shows, taken the pictures. That night after dinner, she crashed early with a migraine. I was restless, couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I figured I'd walk it off. I didn't feel like looping the pool deck again with drunk tourists and bad music, so I headed down, toward the quieter levels. Eventually, I found myself on deck 6 near the rear of the ship. It was empty and quiet. It was peaceful in a way. That's when I saw a plain white door at the end of the hall. No signage, no keycard reader. Just a metal handle and the ghost of an old sticker or label peeled halfway off. I pulled it open. Inside was a narrow corridor with dim orange lights, exposed pipes, metal grating underfoot. The air hit me immediately. It was thicker, warmer, and under it all, a low mechanical hum. Constant. Deep. It was probably the ship's engines. I told myself I'd walk for a minute, just out of curiosity, then turn around. Maybe 30 steps in, I passed a big number stenciled on the wall. 6A, engine access. Still no warning signs and no cameras. Then I heard something weird, a soft noise up ahead. Fabric against metal, followed by slow footsteps. I stopped, figuring it was a crew member. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. Then, from the far end of the hallway, something stepped into view. It was not a crewmate like I thought at first. Whatever it was too tall to be human. Shoulders brushing the ceiling, arms hanging low, almost down to the knees. I couldn't make out a face. Out of fear, I said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to be back here." I started walking back the way I came, fast. I didn't run, not until I heard it following me. The footsteps echoed, deep and metallic. Like every step it took was twice the weight of a normal person. Still slow, still steady, but definitely following. It felt like I was running forever. When I finally hit the door, I shoved it open and slammed it behind me and ran back to my room. When I got back to our cabin, I didn't say a word to my girlfriend. I didn't want to scare her. But the next night, around 3 a.m., I woke up freezing. The room was ice cold and the AC was off. Then I heard it. On the other side of the wall behind our bed. Heavy footsteps, one at a time. I pressed my ear to the wall, and I swear, I heard breathing. Long, shaky inhales, wet, almost raspy. Then, right behind the wall, I heard a voice. It whispered my name. Not my full name, not sir. My nickname, the one only my girlfriend uses. I stayed still in bed waiting for more sounds, but the rest of the night was quiet. The next morning, I asked a crew member if there was a utility room or storage space behind that part of the ship. He looked confused. Said that whole section behind the cabins was structural. Sealed space. No access. No one back there. 2 days later, we docked. I didn't tell my girlfriend. I didn't tell anyone. They'll think I'm crazy, and I don't blame them. I would too. This happened a couple years ago when I was 17. It was a Friday night in early September, and I was home alone for the weekend. My parents had gone to visit my aunt a few hours away, and I didn't feel like going. I had some school stuff to do, and honestly, I just wanted the house to myself for a bit. Around 9 p.m., it started pouring, like heavy, cold rain that just wouldn't let up. I was in the living room, half watching some movie with the volume down and scrolling on my phone. The wind outside was loud enough that it kept catching my attention. Our house is near the edge of the neighborhood, so it's mostly quiet with a long driveway and one streetlight near the front door. Sometime after midnight, I heard 3 knocks at the front door, slow and spaced out. I stopped what I was doing. I wasn't expecting anyone, and strangers usually don't come knocking at this hour. I waited for a second, thinking maybe I misheard it. Then it happened again. 3 knocks. I muted the TV and moved toward the door, staying off to the side. I looked through the peephole. The porch light was on. Rain was still coming down hard, but I could see clearly. There was no one there. I stayed there for another few seconds, then backed off and went to sit down again. I tried to brush it off. Maybe the wind knocked something loose or hit the door weird. It's an old house. Stuff creaks. Maybe 15 minutes later there was lightning and I glanced out the living room window. That's when I saw a man standing at the very end of our driveway, just inside the glow of the streetlight, not moving, arms at his sides, facing the house. I ducked fast. I wanted to stay low. I slowly crawled over to a different window where he couldn't see me and peeked out again. He was still there. Same exact spot, not moving at all. I grabbed my phone and called our neighbor, Mr. Halverson, 2 houses down. He's retired, older guy, real chill. It took a few rings, but he picked up. "Sorry it's late," I whispered. "There's a guy at the end of our driveway, I don't know who it is." "You call the cops?" he asked. "Not yet. I didn't know if I was overreacting." He said he'd look outside. There was a pause. Then he said, "I don't see anyone." I said, "He's under the streetlight. Right at the end of the driveway, you don't see him?" "Nope, it's empty." I slowly peeked again. He was gone. I hung up and called the non-emergency police line, told them what happened. They said they'd send someone to drive by. About 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up and I ran outside to meet the officer. He was nice. We walked around the property, checked the woods, side yard, everything. No one around. No footprints in the mud or grass. Nothing. "Could have been someone just passing through," he said. "Still weird though, especially in weather like this." He told me to lock the doors and call again if anything else happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the lights on, sat in the living room watching the windows. Around 4 a.m., the rain finally stopped. In the morning, I went outside to check one more time. I walked down the driveway to where I'd seen him standing. There were footprints, barefoot, clear impressions like someone had just been standing there in the wet. No shoes, no socks, just bare feet, leading down the driveway and out toward the road, but they weren't there yesterday when the cop was here and I hadn't seen anyone all night. I didn't tell my parents everything when they got back, just said someone might have been snooping around. But I keep thinking about it. Whoever that was, they stood out there in the cold, pouring rain. Never moved, and then they just disappeared. I don't know what they wanted from me. Maybe they were looking for an easy target. Maybe if I hadn't called the cops but opened the door instead, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. It still scares me to think about. I'd been driving along a stretch of highway that felt like it led nowhere, but straight into the night when my car broke down about an hour earlier. My phone was dead, and I had no cell signal. The sun was low, and the sky was fading to gray. I'd been hoping to make it to the next town by now. With no other option, I started walking. After what felt like miles, with nothing but dark trees and broken fences on either side, I saw a sign. It was for a motel, a cheap place. I walked in, hoping for a room where I could charge my phone, sleep, and figure out a plan in the morning. The front office looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. I pushed the door open, and a bell tinkled overhead. Behind the desk was a man, maybe in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and a worn-out polo shirt. He smiled at me, seemed friendly enough. He introduced himself as Carl, the manager, and said he'd be happy to help me find a room. I paid in cash for a single room, and instead of just handing me the key, Carl insisted on walking me to the door. I thought it was odd, but I was tired and cold, and I wanted to get settled, so I followed him without question. As we walked down the cracked concrete path, I noticed the other doors had no vacancy signs or were boarded up. Carl unlocked the door to the room at the very end, fumbled with the lock, and pushed the door open. The smell hit me immediately. Stale cigarette smoke and something else I couldn't quite place. The room was small, with faded wallpaper, a lumpy mattress, and a crooked picture hanging on the wall. The heating unit sputtered quietly near the window, your typical old motel room. Carl stood in the doorway, fiddling with the lock again to make sure it was secure. He told me if I needed anything to just call the front desk, and then he left. I locked it immediately, took a deep breath, and tried to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I tried to focus on the small comforts, a hot shower, a warm bed, and the hope that tomorrow would be better. The shower helped for a while, the hot water clearing the cold from my bones. But when I got into bed, exhaustion hit me harder than I expected. I lay down and almost immediately drifted off. I woke hours later, in the middle of the night, startled by a noise, the soft click of the door unlocking. My heart slammed against my ribs, every nerve in my body screaming to move, to scream, to do anything. But I stayed still, pretending to be asleep. I told myself it must be some kind of mistake, maybe the lock was faulty or the wind nudged the door. But then it opened and I heard someone enter, moving across the floor toward the bed. A shadow fell across my face and I felt a breath, heavy and warm, near my cheek. For what felt like forever, there was only silence. Then a voice, low and calm, whispered near my ear. "Just checking in." It was Carl. I swallowed hard, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I didn't respond. He just stood there, his head 10 inches or so from mine. I wasn't sure of what he might do to me, but I kept pretending to be asleep even though I wanted to scream and run for my life. After what felt like hours, he slowly backed away and the door clicked shut behind him. I sat up unsure if it was just a dream. It felt so real. It had to be real. My hands shook as I searched for my phone. Miraculously, it had charged enough to turn on. I packed up as fast as I could, keeping my ears open for any other noises. At the front desk, Carl acted as if nothing had happened. When I asked about the door unlocking, he shrugged and said, "Must have been a malfunction." I didn't argue. I wanted to get away. I ran outside, thinking I couldn't be far from the town I was originally heading to. I started walking fast down the cracked pavement, hoping to put some distance between me and that motel, between me and Carl. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw him, Carl, emerging from the shadows. He was walking steadily, eyes locked on me. Panic flooded my veins. I broke into a run. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I darted off the pavement and into the woods. Branches scraped against my jacket and face, thorns digging into my skin, but I didn't care. I pressed myself against a tree trunk, chest heaving, trying to steady my breath. I could hear Carl crashing through the underbrush somewhere behind me. I stayed silent, hoping I was hidden enough. Minutes stretched on like hours. His footsteps had faded. I waited, still too afraid to move, afraid he might still be out there searching. Eventually, silence fell. I crept forward, staying low, moving from tree to tree. When I finally reached the edge of the woods, I looked back one last time. No sign of Carl. I flagged down the first person I saw and begged for help. That night I realized how easily a simple place could turn into a nightmare, and how some people aren't what they seem. We were two Americans on a road trip through northern Norway, me and my best friend Christy. It was late June during the midnight sun season, so it never truly got dark. We were supposed to make it to a small guest house outside of town, near the Lyngen Alps. We should have been there hours ago, But the winding roads and endless photo stops threw us off schedule. We'd been driving for hours and I was already on edge, tired and irritated, when Christy suddenly announced she had to pee. "Can you just hold it?" I asked more harshly than I meant to. She winced. "No, seriously, I can't. I'm dying over here." We were in the middle of absolutely nowhere. No lights, no signs, no houses. Just a narrow road with nothing but miles of silent forest around. Frustrated, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. "Make it quick." Christy grabbed a roll of toilet paper from the back seat, muttered something like, "sorry," and headed toward the tree line. I stayed in the driver's seat, engine running, scrolling through photos on my phone to distract myself. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the forest and the pale twilight sky above it. "Christy?" I called out through the open window. No answer. I waited another 30 seconds, then got out, annoyed but also slightly uneasy. "Christy, come on, let's go." Still nothing. That's when the unease really hit me. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped toward the trees. She couldn't have gone far. 20, maybe 30 feet in. Tops. "Christy?" I called again. The forest was darker than I expected. Dense, damp, and strangely quiet. I passed the first few trees, shining my light around. Nothing. Just moss, trunks, and low-hanging branches. I called her phone. It rang. The sound came from deeper in the woods. I couldn't see anything, but I heard it. Muffled and distant. I hesitated. Everything in me said to turn back, but I couldn't leave her out there. I followed the ringtone, weaving between trees, my phone shaking in my hand. The deeper I went, the colder the air felt. My sandals slipped a few times on the damp ground. Then the ringtone stopped, and that's when I heard her voice. "Come over here," Christy said. I swept my light in the direction of the voice. "Christy, what the hell are you doing? You're seriously freaking me out." "Come over here," she said again. I was only a few feet away from where the sound came from, but I still couldn't see her. The forest was too thick. Shadows and branches swallowed everything. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Christy. "Hey, sorry. Didn't hear you calling. I'm back at the car. Where are you?" I stopped breathing for a second. The cold in my chest wasn't from the forest anymore. She texted me again. My phone was on silent LOL. "You good?" Fearing for my life, I turned slowly. I could barely lift my voice when I whispered, "Christy, where are you?" "Come here," the voice said again. I knew now. It wasn't her. I backed away, eyes fixed in the direction of the voice, phone light shaking so bad it barely helped. Another buzz. Another text. "Jess, are you okay? You're freaking me out. Where the hell are you?" And then I saw the thing that had been mimicking her. Just beyond a cluster of trees, maybe 20 feet away, was a face. White like porcelain. No eyebrows, no hair. Just two black eyes and a smile too that was twice the size of a normal human's mouth. It was looking directly at me. Everything went silent for a moment and it felt like forever. Then it moved towards me. I ran, full sprint. No logic, no thoughts. Just knew that I had to get out of there. "Christy, get in the car," I screamed as I ran. "Lock the doors." I burst out of the forest, gravel spraying as I skidded onto the road. Christy was standing there looking confused and startled. "What the hell are you—" "Get in!" I shoved her toward the passenger side. We slammed the door shut. I locked everything and threw the car into drive, tires kicking up gravel as we peeled away. "Jess, what is going on?" she asked. I was crying and shaking uncontrollably. "There was something. It pretended to be you. I heard your ringtone. It talked like you. I followed it into the woods. God, I thought it was you." She stared at me, pale and wide-eyed. "What do you mean?" "I was like 50 feet from the car. I didn't hear you at all." I looked at her and knew she was telling the truth. She was scared too now. I drove for hours until we reached the guest house. We didn't check in, didn't sleep. We just sat in the car, doors locked, headlights on until the sun was bright again. I never believed in the paranormal. Not really. But after that night in the northern woods of Norway, I do. I really, really do. A couple years ago, I went through a rough patch where I didn't really have a place to stay. I wasn't technically homeless, just stuck between apartments after a roommate situation blew up on me. I didn't want to crash with anyone, and I couldn't afford a motel every night, so I decided I'd sleep in my car for a few days until I figured things out. It was late October, so it was getting cold at night, but I had a sleeping bag, some blankets, and a spot I thought was safe. It was this little pull-off area near the edge of town. Pretty quiet, tucked behind some trees, but not totally isolated either. It felt like a decent balance between privacy and not being in the middle of nowhere. The first night was fine. Cold, uncomfortable, but nothing weird. I woke up a few times from the cold or animals in the woods, but that was expected. The second night, though, was completely different. I parked in the same spot again, cracked the windows just a bit to keep them from fogging up, and got in the back seat with the sleeping bag pulled over my head. I remember it was around 11:30 when I finally started dozing off. Everything was quiet. No cars, no wind, just that deep silence you get on a back road. It was peaceful. Around 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up. I was completely still, listening, when I heard the sound of gravel crunching just outside the car. I had these cheap reflective sunshades cut to fit all my windows for privacy and insulation, so I couldn't see anything outside. But I instantly regretted not leaving a small gap to peek through. The footsteps circled the car once. Then they stopped, right next to the back passenger door where I was lying. I swear I could feel someone standing there. You know, that feeling you get when you know someone's close, even if you can't see them. I stayed still. My phone was dead, huge mistake, and I didn't have any kind of weapon on me. I was afraid to even make a move to roll the windows up or start the engine, because that would light up the entire car and let whoever it was know I was awake. Then I heard the soft sound of someone brushing up against the car, like fabric dragging across the paint. A second later, I heard the faint click of someone testing the door handle. At that point, I wanted to jump up and drive off, but something in me just said, "Don't move." I felt like if they knew I was awake, something worse would happen. Then they started walking around my car again. They stopped near the back. They tapped on the rear window. I still didn't move. I just laid there terrified, holding my keys in one hand and the door lock in the other, ready to start the car the second anything else happened. Eventually, though, the footsteps faded into the gravel. Then silence followed. I stayed like that until the sun came up. I didn't sleep, didn't even sit up. Just stared at the ceiling of my car, listening, and waited for morning. When it was finally light out, I sat up and looked around. No one was there. I never went back to that spot. And honestly, I barely slept in my car after that. I don't know who that was or what they wanted, but they weren't just passing by. I was 17 when this happened. It was early summer in 2009, school had just ended, and I had this habit of staying out way too late. I'd been hanging out at a friend's house a few blocks away. We'd stayed up playing games, eating junk food, and just wasting time like teenagers do. I didn't even realize how late it had gotten until I checked my phone. 3:04 a.m. I didn't want to call my parents for a ride and deal with the lecture, so I decided to walk. The air was still warm from the day, but that eerie nighttime quiet had set in. No cars, no people. On my way home, I passed a small playground near the elementary school. It was a place I used to hang out at when I was younger. It looked empty. Just that typical setup with a jungle gym, a couple of slides, and a set of swings on a metal frame. I don't know why, but I decided to stop. Maybe it was the nostalgia, or maybe I just wanted to clear my head. Either way, I walked through the gate and sat down on one of the swings. I wasn't thinking about anything deep, just letting my legs rock slightly back and forth, zoning out. My neighborhood always felt safe, so I didn't really feel nervous. That changed when I noticed the swing next to me start to move. Just a little sway like a breeze had passed through. But there was no wind, not even a breeze. I actually stopped moving to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The swing kept going back and forth a little harder each time. I told myself it was probably just leftover momentum, or maybe the frame shifting from my own movement had started it. That made sense. But after another few seconds, it picked up. That was when I stood up. I gave it one last glance. Maybe I was just tired. Either way, I started heading toward the gate. I'd taken maybe 10 steps when the gate suddenly slammed shut. I had left it open. It wasn't one of those gates with a latch or spring that automatically closes. You had to push it. But now it had shut completely. Hard enough that it echoed across the empty street. There was no wind. Nothing else around that could have pushed it. I turned around and saw that the swing was now swinging violently, almost like someone was on it, pumping their legs, leaning into it. But there was no one there. At that point, my nerves took over. I turned back and jogged to the gate, tried to open it, but it was locked. It was just one of those basic chain-link playground gates. No padlock, just a simple latch on the inside. But no matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. It was like something had jammed it. That's when I made the decision to climb the fence. It wasn't that tall, maybe 5 feet, and I figured it'd be easy enough to hop over and get the hell out of there. I got one leg over, then the other, halfway straddling the top. And that's when I felt something grab my hoodie from behind and yank. I lost my balance and fell backwards, landing hard on my back in the bark chips. I scrambled up immediately and spun around. No one. Not a soul. Just that swing, still creaking back and forth, slowing down now. I didn't even try the fence again. I just sprinted back to the gate and threw my weight into it, hitting it with my shoulder over and over. On the 5th hit, it finally gave. I don't know why I stopped running when I did, maybe 50 or 60 feet down the road. Something in me told me to look back, just to make sure. So I did. And standing just inside the playground fence was a girl. She couldn't have been older than 12. She was small, maybe 4.5 feet tall, wearing light-colored pajamas or a dress. I couldn't tell in the dark. But the weirdest thing? She was just standing there looking at me. I couldn't see her face clearly. Her hair was dark and long, hanging straight down. She didn't say anything. She just raised one hand and waved, like we knew each other. I didn't wave back. My legs kicked in before my brain did, and I ran all the way home without looking back again. When I got to my front porch, I had to sit there for a few minutes before I could get my key in the door, because my hands were shaking so bad. I didn't sleep at all that night. I still don't know what happened. I've told a few people, and they always try to explain it away. Maybe it was just a kid messing around. Maybe someone locked the gate as a prank. Maybe I panicked. Maybe. But I'll tell you what I do know. There was no one else around when I walked into that playground. And a 12-year-old girl being out at 3 a.m., standing silently in the shadows, waving without saying a word. That's not normal. That's something I'll never forget. Me and my friend named Kyle were out on a survival trip. We'd done it a couple of times before. We were both fans of the big YouTube channel Outdoor Boys who got us into this hobby. This trip was going to be the first longer trip where we would wander through a mountain range in Alaska. We'd booked our ticket and packed our gear weeks prior. When we got there, everything was fine. The nature was stunning, and the mountains were absolutely beautiful. We had planned a route beforehand and felt like we were pretty much ready to take on Alaska, but we couldn't have been more wrong. The first day went by fine. It wasn't until nightfall that we heard something unusual. Far away in the distance, we heard a roar. We knew there were bears in the area, but it didn't sound like no bear we'd ever heard before, so we figured it might have been a moose or maybe even an elk. Later that night, I thought I heard something brush against the tent walls, but I don't remember much of it. The next morning when we woke up, the weather was really foggy, which is what you can expect when you visit Alaska. We could barely see 80 feet ahead. We packed up our tent and continued along the route. A couple of hours later, Kyle, who was in charge of navigating, suddenly stopped. He looked confused and said, "We should have reached the other side of the mountain by now." I asked him how he knew when we were there, and he said there was supposed to be a big lake there. The fog was still heavy, and I got the feeling that we were a bit lost, but I didn't worry too much since we had satellite GPS as a backup. We continued walking, but as we never found the lake, we decided to put the map aside and use the satellite GPS. Kyle took it out of his bag, but when he looked at it, he had this shocked facial expression. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "It doesn't want to turn on." I told him to keep trying, but after 10 minutes we were both realizing the seriousness of our situation. Being lost in Alaska is no joke. We tried to head back, but we couldn't recognize the surroundings behind us. Both of us assumed we had the satellite GPS as a backup, so neither of us paid much attention to remembering what our surroundings looked like. Shocked and freaked out, we stood there, and suddenly the roar, or whatever it was from yesterday, came again. The sound was so deep. It sounded like nothing I'd ever heard before. We decided to continue a bit to space ourselves away from the animal before setting up camp. It would be easier to navigate when the fog wasn't there. We set up camp but didn't make a campfire as everything was too wet. We went inside the tent, made some food on our gas burners, and prepared to go to bed. Just as we got into our sleeping bags, the roar came again. It sounded like it was pretty close to our tent. We turned off our light and got the bear spray ready just in case. Kyle's hands were shaking as he checked the bear spray. He looked scared, and honestly, I was scared too. The whole situation had left a bad gut feeling in me. We'd never been lost on a trip before. It was pitch black outside. The fog hadn't gotten much better. Before we went to bed, I went out to pee. I didn't want to go too far from the tent, but as I got out and looked around, I noticed something maybe 200 feet away. A pair of glowing yellow eyes. I stood there looking at them, wondering what I was really seeing. Then another pair of eyes joined them. At first I thought it was deer or maybe even wolves, but then a rock landed right beside me. Another one hit the tent. Terrified, I pulled out my flashlight and lit the area up, and what I saw shocked me to my core. 2 humanoid creatures stood there 200 feet away, half hiding behind tree logs. It wasn't people. It was something else. The way their posture was, it couldn't have been human. I yelled at Kyle to get out here. He sprinted outside. I told him what happened. The creatures had now disappeared, but we both knew they were still there somewhere. I told him we had to get out of here, and just then another larger rock hit our tent, causing it to collapse. Kyle agreed. We grabbed whatever gear we could, left whatever we couldn't, and started running out into the dark fog, keeping close to each other. We could hear the humanoid creatures in the distance. It sounded like they were laughing. Suddenly, more rocks came flying past us. At this point, I honestly didn't believe we'd make it out. We ran in the dark with our flashlights swinging around. Then we heard the roar again. We both knew what had made that sound now. We heard running behind us. We were being chased. In a desperate attempt, Kyle took out his flare gun and shot it towards the creatures. Everything went quiet. The only thing I could hear was the wind and the flare burning. Kyle took another flare and shot it up in the air, hoping someone would see it. It was a last desperate attempt to get help. The fog was now dark red from the flares. We stood there knowing we didn't have much time before the flares went out. I came up with the idea that if we turned our flashlights off and hid between the trees, they'd be unable to see us. Kyle didn't seem convinced that it would work, but we didn't have any other options. They were clearly faster and stronger than us. He shot another flare towards the trees where we last heard them. Then we turned our flashlights off and went low to the ground. Everything was dead silent now. The flares eventually went out. We couldn't see a thing, but we could hear them walking around. I picked up a small branch and threw it as far as I could, hoping it would make noise to attract them away from us. And it did. We heard them running toward the sound and eventually fading into the distance. We kept low and huddled together to keep ourselves warm. At dawn, we finally dared to move. The fog had lifted a little, just enough to see our collapsed tent in the distance. But there was something else. Small handprints in the mud, dozens of them, circling where we'd been hiding. Not animal prints. Fingers. Long, narrow fingers. As the fog lifted, we could finally make out where we were. We traced our way back, slowly, cautiously, and eventually found a trail that led us out. What should have been a peaceful survival trip turned into something out of a nightmare. To this day, we have no idea what we saw that night. Those things, whatever they were, weren't animals. They were watching us, stalking us. They were smart, and they didn't want us to leave.